The 18th century, often referred to as the Age of Sail, was a time of great exploration, trade, and naval warfare. However, it was also a century marked by catastrophic maritime disasters. The seas were treacherous, and the technology of the time, while advanced in many ways, could not prevent the devastating accidents that occurred. Here, we will explore 5 of the biggest sea disasters of the 18th century, analyzing their causes, impacts, and legacies. 1. The Wager Disaster, 1741. The Wager was a British warship that became infamous for one of the most harrowing maritime disasters of the 18th century. As part of the British Navy's efforts during the War of Jenkins' Ear, the Wager was part of a squadron commanded by Commodore George Anson, sent on a long voyage to capture Spanish colonies in South America. The Wager was tasked with navigating the treacherous waters off the coast of South America, and during a storm off the coast of Chile, the ship was wrecked. The ship had been caught in a severe storm, and after days of battling the elements, it ran aground on the rocks of a desolate island, now known as Wager Island. The crew, faced with starvation, harsh weather, and the isolation of the island, was left in a dire situation. Of the 150 crew members, only 30 survived the ordeal. The survivors were forced to take extreme measures to stay alive, including cannibalism, and many of them faced further hardships in their attempt to return to civilization. The Wager disaster is remembered as one of the most brutal maritime tragedies of the 18th century, highlighting both the dangers of naval exploration and the resilience of sailors in the face of unimaginable adversity. 2. The HMS Pandora disaster, 1791. The HMS Pandora was a British Royal Navy ship sent on a mission to capture the mutineers of the famous HMS Bounty, who had staged a rebellion against their captain, William Bligh, in 1789. The Bounty mutiny became one of the most infamous events in naval history, and the British government wanted to bring the mutineers to justice. The Pandora was dispatched to the Pacific Ocean in pursuit of the mutineers, and in 1791, it located the mutineers' hideout on the island of Tahiti. After successfully capturing a number of the mutineers, the Pandora began its return journey to Britain. However, disaster struck when the ship encountered a fierce storm as it sailed near the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. The ship was struck by heavy winds and waves, and despite the crew's best efforts to navigate the storm, the ship was dashed against the reef. The crew struggled to escape, and many of the mutineers who had been captured drowned in the disaster. In total, 35 of the 100 people aboard the ship died, either from the wrecking of the ship or from exposure and drowning. The sinking of the HMS Pandora was a significant event, not just because of the loss of life, but also due to the political consequences. It delayed the trial of the mutineers, and it became part of the complex and tragic legacy of the Bounty mutiny. The wreck of the Pandora was discovered much later, in 1977, and it remains an important historical site in maritime archaeology. 3. The loss of the Royal George, 1782. The Royal George was one of the British Royal Navy's most powerful warships, a first-rate ship of the line that had played a prominent role in several major naval battles. The ship's tragic loss in 1782 was one of the most dramatic and impactful naval disasters of the 18th century. On the 29th of August 1782, the Royal George was anchored off Portsmouth, England, in the Solent, a strait between the Isle of Wight and the mainland. The ship was undergoing repairs, and many of its crew were off duty. The ship had a large amount of water in its lower hold due to leaks, and this, combined with the ship being tilted due to the repair work, led to a sudden and catastrophic chain of events. A sudden shift in the ship's weight distribution caused the vessel to capsize in just a few minutes. The ship rolled over, sending the crew and many of the workers aboard into the sea. A staggering 900 people perished in the disaster, including Admiral Richard Kempenfelt, who was on board at the time. The wreck of the Royal George was a national tragedy for Britain, and its loss was felt deeply throughout the country. The shipwreck remained lost for nearly 2 centuries until it was rediscovered in 1970. The loss of the Royal George highlighted the dangers of naval warfare and the vulnerability of even the mightiest ships to disaster. 4. The Batavia disaster, 1629. While not strictly within the 18th century, the Batavia disaster is often cited as one of the most infamous maritime disasters of the 17th century, and its consequences reverberated into the 18th century, especially in terms of its aftermath. The Batavia was a Dutch East India Company ship that set sail from the Netherlands in 1628, bound for Indonesia. The ship, carrying a valuable cargo of goods and people, struck a reef off the coast of Australia on its journey. The wreck left the survivors stranded on a desolate island in the Indian Ocean. The story of the Batavia disaster is particularly grim, as the survivors were subjected to a wave of violence and mutiny. The captain, along with a group of loyal sailors, managed to establish a settlement on the island. However, a group of mutineers, led by a man named Geronimus Cornelis, took control of the situation. They began executing their fellow survivors and engaging in horrific acts of violence and cruelty. Over a period of months, around 100 people were killed, including women and children. The surviving mutineers were eventually captured when a rescue ship arrived, but the brutality of the events became legendary. The Batavia disaster's impact on maritime history was significant. The story of survival, betrayal, and punishment became a cautionary tale for sailors and a dramatic example of the harsh realities of life at sea in the 17th and 18th centuries. 5. The Great Storm of 1703. One of the most catastrophic natural disasters at sea during the 18th century was the Great Storm of 1703, which affected the coasts of Britain and the surrounding seas. This powerful storm struck in early November 1703 and caused widespread destruction, particularly along the southern and eastern coasts of England. The storm was one of the most severe to hit Britain in recorded history, and it had a devastating impact on the merchant and naval fleets. The storm caused the loss of numerous ships, including both military and civilian vessels, with estimates suggesting that up to 1,000 ships were wrecked or damaged. The death toll is thought to have exceeded 8,000 people, and the storm caused extensive damage to coastal communities. In addition to the human cost, the economic toll was immense, as many of the ships lost were engaged in vital trade routes. The Great Storm of 1703 was a reminder of the power of nature and the vulnerability of human endeavors at sea. It also led to improvements in weather forecasting and naval practices, as the disaster underscored the need for better preparation and response to such unpredictable and deadly events. These 5 disasters represent just a small fraction of the maritime tragedies of the 18th century, but each one highlights the extreme dangers faced by sailors during this period. From storms and shipwrecks to mutinies and violence, the sea was a place of both adventure and peril. The legacies of these disasters shaped maritime practices, safety regulations, and the way people understood the dangers of the oceans in subsequent centuries. The 18th century was truly an age of both maritime triumphs and disasters, a time when the sea's vastness and unpredictability were felt acutely by those who sailed upon it.